Hey there, it's Protest Mom, bring you the Denver Protest News. First, I want to start with the fact that there's something like a march tomorrow, maybe. I don't know. You might have heard of these guys. They go by the initials PSL. Pretty sure that's not pumpkin spice latte, but that's the first thing I thought of. Just kidding. PSL is having a march. And also, the Christmas Village is opening this evening around 6 o'clock. There might be some people there protesting that. You might want to join them. It's going to be awesome. I mean, really, in the middle of a pandemic, saying that we don't have the resources to build shelters for the homeless for the winter, we're going to have a Christkindl village that was set up pretty quickly, fully functioning with lights and electricity and toilets and stuff, but we can't do anything for the unhoused. I don't know about that. I also kind of have to wonder, the people participating in this market, are they single mothers? Are they small business owners? Are they really, I just have to ask, is this really saving small businesses in this economic downturn? Or do people have to pay a fee to be in the stalls? I'm doubting that this was done as an act of generosity on behalf of the city, because the city doesn't do things like that. But capitalism. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So those are the two events that I'm aware of this evening. If I become aware of more, I will put them in the comments below. But really what I wanted to do today was talk a little bit about the thread that I put up yesterday. So as you may or may not care, I have a small company, small business, the Fitness Protection Program, where I teach running as self-care. The crux of what I do is making sure that the fitness world, which I think is toxic and terrible, that there is a safe space within it for people who might already be damaged by diet culture, who might already be damaged by hustle culture. I mean, like, not everything you do has to have KPIs and metrics around it. Like, if that's fun for you, cool. But if it's not fun, then that's kind of a problem. So I have a very different way of doing things and a very different approach. And I bring that different approach to my business. Along with what I bring to my business is 20 years of therapy that I've had and still engage in, because I love it. And that's what I'm doing after this at 11 o'clock, as a matter of fact, and I'm never going to stop. So one of the things that I have to do, both as a coach, as I prepared for my Zoom meeting this afternoon, you might have seen that thread I put up. It really resonated with a lot of people, and the messages, the DMs that I got were heartbreaking. So I thought it might make sense to take a minute and delve a little bit further into this, because a recurring theme in the private messages and DMs was, thanks for this. I'm in a depressive spiral and I don't know how to get out. I've been feeling really worthless. And worthless was not a word on my list yesterday, but I wanted to talk about that too, because it all really does tie in together. And to frame that discussion the way I do as a coach, I have to frame the way that we talk about things. Depression, we usually think of it as a noun, a thing, a disease, this exogenous that might come our way. And I like that visual. I actually kind of do. I don't like to think of depression as a disease, but I also got to remember, I'm not a therapist. I'm not qualified to have any of this discussion with anybody. What I'm here is trying to repackage some poorly communicated content to you in a way that resonates and might make a little bit of sense. So when we talk about depression, I like to think, how about instead of thinking about it like as this disease, if we were to think about it as actual pressure on your brain. Your brain is like a depression in the road from impact, right? So there's impact, there's trauma, and as a result of that trauma, your brain becomes depressed. And a depressed brain that's under this type of pressure, that's dealing with the trauma, it's not going to function the way it normally would. And that's not a bad thing. So before I go any further, this is where I have to throw in the trigger warning. I'm from rural Tennessee. This is the way I sound most of the time when I'm not consciously trying to tuck the accent in like a bed at the Hilton. But I understand that when I speak this way, it evokes certain emotions in people, and I do the best I can to eliminate the Christian references and my accent. But when I get really worked up, and when I talk about these things, I get really worked up, a lot of my background comes out, and I beg you to just hear me out and hear the messages. And remember that I don't go to the same type of church anymore. I left all that shit behind myself because I thought it too was toxic and terrible. At the same time, at the very root and the heart of a lot of the things that I was brainwashed into believing when I was little, there's some beauty in there. And that beauty is what I have clung to. And I'm going to share that beauty with you. This is not an attempt to convert. These are just really nice thoughts. So the first very nice thought that actually comes from the Bible is this one. And if you've had a baby at any point, someone probably gave you a blanket that said this: you are perfectly made in the image of a perfect maker. And that, I know for a lot of people that doesn't resonate, but let's focus on that. You are perfectly made. What if this was our starting point? What if we operated from this basis? What if instead of treating people as damaged individuals that are hopeless and there's something wrong with them, if we just said, hey, everyone's perfectly made. Every decision you've ever made was the right one because you are perfectly rational. What then? What if we started there? Where would we go? I think the world would be really, really different. And here's why. So back to the word depression, right? So your body doesn't differentiate between eustress, which is the positive stress, when you're like exuberant and excited. You've ever been so excited you haven't really been able to think or function? It's very similar to being depressed. It's the same net result. Your executive functioning isn't really working because you're just so excited you can't be anywhere other than that in that excited state. And that happens. So if it's a negative stress, it's going to present as depression. If it's positive stress, it's going to present as euphoria. Now, very few of us will ever be lucky enough to stay in a state of euphoria for extended periods of time, but it's because of different prompts. That's due to society. So when you are under stress, your body, as we learned in the thread yesterday, your body's going to kick out a lot of cortisol. When your body kicks out cortisol, stay with me, it makes your amygdala get bigger. That's a part of your brain that controls your emotions and regulates your sleep. Sound like a thing? If you've ever been really, really excited, you probably couldn't fall asleep because you were excited. If you've ever been incredibly depressed, no matter how lethargic you were, that's the depressed brain function, you probably still couldn't sleep. And that's from the cortisol. So like when you think about that, depression is a perfectly rational response. I would argue it's proof positive that you're perfectly made. Your body is doing exactly what it was intended to do: survive. It shuts down the parts of your brain that are not necessary to deal with that overwhelm in that moment to get you through. Now, this is where the PTSD comes in, but we'll get to that in a minute. So first, if we're operating from this assumption that your brain is a perfect machine, remember the consequence, stress is stress, and your brain doesn't differentiate. It's just a response. But here, the consequences are real. What I mean of that is when we go into a very stressful situation and we're thinking about the outcomes, if we've seen them before, your brain is just this amazing machine that's doing millions upon millions of calculations every second. That's science. We know that. That's proven. We tend to disregard the gut instinct because it isn't rational and it isn't informed. But I would argue that's really stupid. It doesn't have to. Your brain is perfectly made. It is perfectly functional. It's the most efficient machine on the planet. We've not been able to replicate it yet. It's that good. To that end, your body and brain is perfectly geared towards survival. The consequences that you're imagining are probably not totally BS. I'm in this situation and I'm scared. This could happen. This could happen. This could happen. Now, here's more proof that you're perfect. PTSD. When you've had a really traumatic experience, that's where trauma comes in. So post-traumatic stress disorder is real, and we tend to invalidate it because the way we were taught about it didn't include us in the paradigm. We talked about soldiers on the front lines of World War II. How many front lines still exist, y'all? How many wars being fought right now have front lines and people in actual trenches? I hate that allegory because it invalidates everybody else doing it under the same pressure, doing the same work, but maybe just weren't in the same physical location at that moment. And when it comes to anything in the military, there are teams working together, and to only hold the one up who's at the front as the one worthy of having PTSD, so therefore everyone else is irrational, that's just nonsense. It's terrible, but it's what we've been taught to do. And the way we've been taught to look at PTSD, because the framework for PTSD never includes protesters, it never includes us. And it certainly never includes abused children, because then we'd have to admit that parents are doing bad things and do something about that. So since we're not ready to do that, we put it on the children. So when your brain senses the same danger that it's been in before, it'll instantly ramp back up to that point of trauma that it experienced during the traumatic event. So time to get over that and change that response isn't enough. You've really got to change the wiring in your brain. And the ways we can do this, there are lots of really good tools. There's EMDR. There's EMDR is I looked it up before I got started. I've done this 2 or 3 times. I've had 2 or 3 different sessions of it, and it's incredible. It is really incredible stuff. It sounds a little hokey. You'll be like, I don't understand the point of this. But if you have access to it and a therapist recommends it, please do it. It is game changing because it eliminates that trauma response in your brain that will trigger you. You go from 0 to 60 and it has your whole body shut down and your brain go into survival mode. Just that sense of buzzing whenever your body senses that same danger again. It helps break that PTSD cycle. It literally rewires your brain. Okay, so remember too, I feel like I want this on a t-shirt, consequences determine trauma. The consequences of the event determine whether or not that was traumatic to you. And what's traumatic to one person might not be to another. And we tend to rank them because that's the only way we're ever taught to think about a hierarchy. Well, this is more important than this. And that's kind of stupid too. It's not the situation or like how real it is. It's the perception and how that fear impacts the individual in that moment. So we invalidate all kinds of people who have very real trauma and refuse to allocate resources to them because we like to say, well, I'm on the outside, I can't see it, you're not worthy. But that comes from capitalism. So capitalism, it tends to rank humans by the value that we contribute to society, which is proved by a paycheck. And that infiltrates our legal system, our justice system. If a judge is setting bond, how valuable is this person to the community? Dollar-wise, what community services will not exist? And they're judging that person's value to the community versus how bad that crime is. That happens. That's normal. It shouldn't be, but we've normalized it. So under capitalism that ranks humans, the cry for help, I need help, what you're saying is, it's a request for resources. I am asking for assistance. And think about it, y'all. How often have you asked for help and heard yes? I haven't. The 2 times, I may have had multiple periods of trauma, but the 2 traumatic events that I had to use EMDR to get to work through, both times I asked for help, both times I didn't get it. And that creates another set of trauma that you have to work through usually on your own, unless you have the resources to go get it. So we say, I need help. We request these resources. We hear no over and over and over again. So we stop asking because we know what the consequences are going to be. We know what answer we're going to get. We've been there before. Our brains are rational. So, and this, again, that's proof of it. Then we blame you for not asking as though, oh, well, you should have asked, like it's your fault. It's your fault for not asking. As opposed to, well, we've never actually said yes. Well, we can't say yes if you don't ask, that everything is put back on you. So sidestepping that loop is a totally rational decision. And blaming the victim is really stupid, but capitalism does that. As a society, we just don't invest in human capital. I say this all the time. I think that this is a mistake in business where we treat all people as replaceable and disposable. And I think it's horrific in communities and small like society at large. We throw away people rather than fix systems that are broken. If we would take some of the money and reallocate it, we would be able to capitalize on so much human potential. And it makes me sad and sick to think about how much is wasted on a daily basis under a system that we believe markets are perfectly efficient when they're not. Actually, markets that are allocated equal resources could be, but this is all theoretical and pieces of paper that treat people like widgets, and we're not. Our brains are amazing. We are throwing away perfectly made, beautiful brains all the time because we don't want to invest the resources necessary to heal the trauma. And to me, that's unforgivable. That's as bad as throwing away money. It's worse than throwing away money. So if you feel worthless right now, and hear me there, that's PTSD. That's a rational response to the position that capitalism has put you in. It's told you that you're not worthy and you're not worthy of help. You're not worthy of resources, that you got to do this on your own and get over it yourself, that no one's going to care. Or that your efforts are useless, or now that you are broken in some way, that you are flawed, that you are no longer valuable to society. And that is a lie. It's not true. It's bad management on the part of society. Those are lazy managers. was an investment banker. I have something to say about companies that are poorly managed. They don't get my money. And I have a lot to say about where my tax dollars go when I see systems mismanaging money as well as human potential. So what does all this mean? And where do we go from here? So I call this with my clients the winning at life cycle, which sounds a little hokey, but it is. This is part of CBT, the cognitive behavior therapy, where we rewire your brain to see the best in what you did instead of seeing the worst and throwing it out there before anyone else could, to throw out all the reasons before anyone could invalidate you, and either get on board with that invalidation so that to protect yourself from more trauma, or to convince yourself you don't need the resources in the first place. So when you internalize everything. So if you're feeling worthless, you're feeling numb, you're feeling depressed, all of that, and you're dealing with it on your own and you haven't reached out, that too is a rational response. It doesn't mean that you don't deserve it though. It doesn't make any of this true. And I want you to remember that too. You are rational. You are not broken. Society is broken, and we're here to fix it together. That's what this movement for Black Lives is effectively about. It will benefit everyone. So when it comes to healing, first you need someone like me telling you that your pain and your trauma is real. And for a lot of people, we won't get that outside of a therapeutic setting. We need to ramp down your central nervous system and break this cycle of going 0 to 60 every time you see something that's triggering, because in rape culture and diet culture and hustle culture, so much can be triggering. I don't even know, as someone who's been incredibly self-aware, doing lots of really, really hard, ugly work for the better part of 20 years, since the first time really I did EMDR 10 years ago, I would say that's when the real work started and I actually started healing. And I got to tell you, it is really hard, and I still don't know when I'm going to be triggered. You know, the most recent time I was triggered, watching the morning show, that Apple show about Jennifer Aniston as the morning and Reese Witherspoon as the morning hosts. That triggered me. And if you've seen it, not episode 7, I was triggered from episode 1, watching a woman that was the highest paid, but still didn't have a seat at the table, effectively didn't have power, and was about to be pushed out. And all the pushback that she got from everyone around her who's saying you had power you didn't use, in a moment when she herself felt powerless because she lacked the validation, and how that played out through her life. That triggered me on a level I couldn't quite articulate. So you're not always going to know what's necessarily, no matter how good you get or no matter how healed you are. To me, healing means I can talk about my rapes. It means I can talk about my attacks. It means that I don't need a trigger warning when I see a thread on those topics. That doesn't mean I'm not triggered. And where I'm triggered, that episode 7 didn't trigger me at all. Episode 2, 3, and 4 did. And that is where I've been doing my work. But I tell you that to tell you this. There is privilege in having access to this. And privilege, white people have been taught to feel ashamed of it because we don't know what to do about it or how to use it. And that's no one's fault but ours. Again, a sloppy conversation that society tries to start but doesn't really want to have, let alone finish. So a lot of us don't want to reach for help because it isn't equally accessible to everyone. And having help makes us feel bad because theoretically, if I can get help, then my PTSD must not be that bad. So many people have it worse, et cetera. And there goes another spiral of you don't deserve that can lead right back to depression. So I tell you all of that to tell you this. You are perfect. And you have been surviving in an abusive system that's been kicking you in the teeth since day one. Don't compare your kicks in the teeth to others. You do have the ability. It's what you have access to in order to heal and recover. That where the privilege kind of comes in, and as well as the fear. So if we're going to put it in this paradigm, if you have the privilege to go get help, please, please, please go get help. And then we go through the winning at life cycle. So if you do not have access to therapy, this is the framework I give to my clients. So when you catch these negative thoughts, these feelings of worthlessness, like nothing I do matters, I'm not needed, no one cares. This is in that moment when you can train your brain to catch yourself doing that, fight back. Fight back. I say this all the time. What I'm trying to do is program Coach MK, hear my voice in the back of your head saying, fuck that. That isn't true. You have value. I wouldn't be here otherwise. Whatever it is, and I do enough of these live streams at my client, and I throw enough of these enough of my catchphrases into my work that my clients will often say, I can hear your voice in the back of my head when I went into this work negotiation, when I set out to do and have this difficult conversation with my husband about needing more time, because we're never talking about the running, right? It's all the things that get in the way of doing the things that we want to do. That's where the coach comes in. I'm a run coach, not a life coach, but I can talk about my damage all day long, and I can give you the language you need to advocate for yourself for twice the distance. So number one, catch the thoughts, fight back, let my voice do the talking, channel your inner MK. What would MK say right now? And let that shit come flowing at your brain. Because one thing that I would say is I would name your wins. I tell everyone to count your wins. You cannot afford to look at the work that was unfinished or what you didn't do ever. What you need to do is start by first go back and give yourself credit for what was done. No one can do all things. There's no single person that's going to change the world. We like to believe it. One person could change the world. That's really nice. But that doesn't mean you have to, and you personally are responsible for the outcome. That is the dangerous type of thinking that we perpetuate really in this toxic negative society. So name your wins. I showed up to 3 actions this week. I went to city council, I live streamed, and I yelled. I said my piece and I advocated. And I might be in that room by myself, but that doesn't mean I'm doing it wrong. I am advocating for long-term change, because it's really easy to look around and say, no one's doing this work but me, and think that maybe you're wasting your time, or maybe you're not doing it well enough because you haven't recruited new people. This is a slow burn, you guys. And there's a pandemic going on. Don't make it about you. Don't make the failure about you specifically until you first celebrated that the work that you did. Did I do that well? Did I do what I wanted to do? Did I do it in a way that did not hurt me too much personally? Because we're all spending clout. We're all spending a little bit of privilege by participating in these events. And that is really what it's for. That is what privilege is for. If you think of it in those terms, how did I show kindness this week? How did I how did I assist the Black Lives Matter movement? And then start counting that up and keep that pile of wins sacrosanct. Do not invalidate them. Do not let anyone else invalidate them. You be proud of the work that you did. You count those wins. It's not about, like, for my run clients, it's like, well, I only ran 12 miles this week. I'm like, only ran 12 miles in the middle of a global pandemic, going through a divorce, 3 children at home. You found time to run 12 miles? I'm missing the point here. People will take their wins and shit on them and say that win wasn't big enough. And that's not okay. We've got to count our wins, and we've got to keep them sacrosanct. No shitting in your own Cheerios. The next thing to remember, and this is just a footnote to keep in mind, that your trauma becomes your strength. And if you need proof of that, right now you're being led or listening to the voice of someone who was born on a farm in rural Tennessee, told as a female that she had no place in this world, that the best I could hope for was to marry a preacher who wouldn't beat me too publicly, that I would never be smart enough or good enough to have any of the things that I wanted out of life. And I'm not the smartest person in any room. I'm not. I know that. I'm good with that. But I've done some cool ass shit. I went to Georgetown. I became an investment banker. I've lived in 7 countries. I've had cool experiences because as a little kid in a terribly abusive situation, I developed a coping mechanism I called Coach MK. I became the voice in the back of my own head saying, all of this is a lie. All I have to do is get out. Once I leave, I can do whatever I want. All I have to do is toe this line and be good. And then the world, and I believed it. I convinced myself with this little part of my personality known as Coach MK that I now monetize and share with the world. So if there's any part of you that has benefited from anything on my Twitter, any of these live streams, or any of the shit I say, I want you to remember that you have no idea what you're capable of. You have no idea what you will be able to produce in this world as a result of your trauma. Because if you can look at me and say, hey, wow, this makes me feel good, or this inspires me, I promise you that is only because I had trauma and worked through it. And that became the source of my strength. It became the source of my superpowers. Because I got more than one, and I believe that everyone does too. And I say this to my clients all the time. You have no idea what you're capable of. And I can't wait to show you. You're going to get there faster if you count your wins, program my voice into the back of your head, and keep showing up. That is what it means to be coached and loved. And all you need, almost any of us will ever need in order to be winning at life. It starts with validation, and you're always going to get that here with me. So that's the thing I want you to remember this week as you look back on the week behind you and look ahead, trying to fill your calendar with things to do. Every training plan I've ever written has rest and recovery built in. There is no training plan for what we're in right now. But I promise you, if you're not building in time to rest, recover, turn your phone off, take a long bath, and find ways to not feel guilty about that, you're not a battery that needs to be plugged in the wall to recharge. You need to just separate from all the stress and let that depression in your brain heal. Let that, if you think of it as a physical thing, people talk about filling their cup. I visualize trauma impacting our brain and leaving a dent. And it takes time and recovery for that dent to go back to where it was before. It'll never be exactly like before, but at least it won't be all the way down here. A depression, recovery. And if you need assistance for that recovery, that doesn't say a damn thing about you. I got here because of therapy. I still take Lexapro to calm my central nervous system. Initially, we only thought I would need it for 6 months. We had no idea how long this shit was going to go on. We've upped my dosage twice. And I'm awesome. And if you look at me and see strong, why in the world aren't you allowing yourself to use the same tools that I do? You deserve it. You deserve all of it. You're coached. You're loved. Even if you doubt it, you're winning at life. And you're going to look back and see that's true. And I can't wait to be by your side when that happens. Between now and then, make good trouble. Make good choices. And if you can't be good, be loud. Be really loud.